lovely people! Welcome to another book chat, the regular but not monthly roundup of what I've been reading recently, and by recently I mean probably 6 months ago because I have a huge backlog of these.
Okay,
the first book I'm going to talk about is The Winter of the Witch by Katherine Arden, or Arden, I don't know which way you say it. By the time this video is up, this is probably going to be like old news, but I loved this book so much. This is the third book in, I always forget what this series is called, the Winter Night series, is that right? Is that something else? I don't know. It's the third book of the Bear and the Nightingale series. This is a series which has just gotten better as it's gone on to me. It's all inspired by a Russian folk tale. The Bear and the Nightingale I absolutely loved, but The Bear and the Nightingale had quite a slow pace. We spent a lot of time just watching Vasya grow up and stuff like this before any of the real, action happened, which I enjoyed because I felt very immersed, but I know some people found incredibly slow. And then the second book, The Girl in the Tower, had a bit more oomph to it, and then again, The Winter of the Witch had even more oomph to it. I feel like it's really just got faster paced as it's gone on, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. This continues Vasya's story. I'm going to try and talk about this in a spoiler-free manner because it's the final book of a series. I have enjoyed how much this series has built and grown. This was certainly very dramatic. Essentially what I thought was going to be the climax of the novel happened about halfway through, and then more story happened, and I'm really glad we had that more story because I feel like what I expected to be the final chapter was still good, but would have been quite predictable as an ending, and actually, where we ended up going with this, I found that much more interesting, and I really was gripped to see how that would all end up. The romance element of this has never been my favourite thing about the series. I will say that I enjoyed it. It's not what really brings me to this. I really love Vasya. She's one of those determined girl, breaks convention, blah blah blah. I really enjoyed the addition of Vasya's sister in the second book. If anything, I would have liked a little bit more Olga because I enjoyed that contrast between different types of being a woman. But I feel like I've really got off topic. Essentially, this was as magical as always. It really gripped my little heart, and I feel a little bit bereft now that it's over, but I absolutely loved it and thoroughly enjoyed it. Next up is Picnic at Hanging Rock by Joan Lindsay. This is an Australian novel. I gather that this is one of those seminal Australian works, I think. This is my friend's favourite book, so she lent it to me to read. Essentially, in the 1900s, a group of girls from a girls' school go on a day trip to Hanging Rock. While they are there, some girls go off on an expedition, and essentially 3 girls and a teacher go missing. And then this explores that. It looks at how this event affects everyone who's involved, whether they're just part of the school or not. To avoid spoilers, I will avoid talking about how this all concludes, but I have feelings, and I did some Wikipediaing, and I don't really know how to talk about that without doing spoilers, so I will put a pin in that. I really enjoyed Joan Lindsay's writing style. She gave a lot of detail on the surroundings and the setting and stuff like that, so it was quite easy to picture where they were. The mystery element was enjoyable. I don't know how I feel about the answers that we are and are not given. I feel like this is one I need to mull over quite a bit. It's a very short book. I think I read this in a day or two, and I've got questions essentially, and I've got feelings. And if you've read this, I'd really like to hear how you got on with it. There were times when it felt like there was such an impending sense of doom and inescapability to how this tragedy has affected people's lives, but then there were other times when there was positive outcomes and hope, and it was trying to think about how this is portraying fated things and earning things. I don't know, I have all these thoughts, and if you've read this book, I would really be interested to hear how your reading experience was compared to mine, because I'm still modelling that out a little bit. After that, we've got The Blue Ice by Hammond. This is another book that was lent to me. Just really working my way through books that were lent to me. This is sort of an adventure thriller. It's set in mostly Norway. Essentially, our guy who used to work for a metal company, they are sent through a package of whale meat this little like lump of rock, this little lump of metal, and they know who it's from, but the man who they think it is from has recently been found dead in Norway. So there's all these questions. Whoever can locate where this metal comes from will be incredibly rich and have loads and loads of money, etc. So multiple players are all trying to hunt down people who are connected with this. Kind of like a mystery thriller in that way. I don't read a lot of thrillers. They're not my favourite genre as a whole. I did enjoy this. I think one of the things I found really good about this was the detail to like the scenery of Norway. I felt like I really had an understanding of the physicality of everywhere they were at. This picked up a lot towards the end, I feel. We have like midnight exhumations of bodies and ski chases and like train stunts and everything like that. Like by the end of this, it felt a little bit James Bondy with this sort of like action type thing. I felt it a little bit dragged a little bit for me at times, but I think that was partly just because the motivation, you know, like these are people who are motivated by they're trying to find this metal deposit so they can like make their fortune. I don't know, like I don't know. So it was enjoyable. I think the strengths were definitely this attention to detail about scenery and the latter half of the book. I'm not sure if I'd be reading any more of this guy's works going forward, but this was an enjoyable read. The penultimate book is Tales from the Celtic Countries by Rhiannon Ifans. This is just a selection of folk tales from Celtic countries, and they have delightful illustrations. I'll see if I can find. So they've got all of these little illustrations throughout. So I had this since I was like a kid, and I found it again, and I thought I would reread it. Actually, it was a lot of fun. There is a nice mix of folktale origins here, so we go from, you know, like Wales to Ireland to Brittany, stuff like that. And it was just essentially a nice little dip in. I enjoyed the illustrations throughout it. There are 12 stories in total. Some of them I knew, some of them I didn't know, the usual thing. They're not particularly long. I would say that this is probably a good buy if you have like a kid who's interested in Celtic mythology, stuff like that, because it's quite readable and there are some nice illustrations in it. Finally is another book that was lent to me, and I have some mixed feelings on this, and that is The Ides of April by Lindsey Davis. This is by the same author who did the Falco series, except for this is now looking at Falco's adopted daughter, Flavia. I haven't read the Falco series, but my family has, so I'm like familiar with it. Essentially, Flavia is like a little detective in Rome during the reign of Domitian, and someone is going about and potentially offing people by making it look like they've just had like a little like heart failure or something, but like there's been a number of occurrences and our Flavia's looking into it. The pros of this are that it's very light and funny. It has like a lot of humour to it. It's quite fun. I think there is a lot of potential here going forward. I've been lent a number of books from this series, so I will be continuing with the series, so I did enjoy it enough to continue with it. My niggle is that I called who the murderer was on their first appearance, and then I had to wait for Flavia to catch up with me, which wouldn't have been so bad, I think, if the pacing had maybe been a little bit quicker. I don't mind figuring it out before the main character has, necessarily. What I found a bit frustrating is that from the person's first appearance, I was like, well, you're a smarmy git, I bet it was you. And then it took a long time of the narrator thinking this person was great. And then, like, eventually we all got, like, we all were on the same page, and we were all like, oh, wait, it's them. I just got a bit frustrated with how long that took. If the story had been condensed slightly, maybe I wouldn't have had that frustration because I wouldn't have had to wait so long. But, you know, like, I'm not necessarily the best at predicting murder mysteries, like, all the time, but this one I just felt was really obvious. So that's, like, my niggle. I'm hoping that that is just this one mystery that I just found obvious, and that going forward reading the rest of them, I won't be able to guess it, and it will be really great, or maybe I'll guess it, but like much later in the game, stuff like this. So like, it didn't bother me enough not to continue with the series, but I did find it a bit frustrating. So like, suitably fun, lots of potential. I'm looking forward to trying the rest of them, but I'm gonna like give it a little while before I read the second one, and then based on how the second one goes, I'll see if I'm gonna continue with all the rest of them. Okay, that is it for this week. I feel like I've maybe rambled a bit. I might have been a bit incoherent. I don't know. Some like complex thoughts going on and stuff today. As per usual, have you read any of these? I would love to hear your thoughts on them. Otherwise, I hope you're having a really lovely day, and I will see you next week for something different.